My twin sister and I stopped speaking in 2009. Not dramatically, not with a fight or a final conversation, or any of the things that mark the end of something important. We just, gradually, stopped. The way rivers stop. Not because the water goes away, because the channel changes, and the water finds somewhere else to go. Her name is Vera. My name is Iris. We are 57 years old. We grew up in a small town in the Wind River Range of Wyoming. Our father was a backcountry guide for 30 years, and we spent our childhoods in high country that most people only see from the highway. We were close the way twins are close, which is to say, in a way that is difficult to explain to people who are not twins, not telepathic, not identical in personality. We were not, but connected in a way that ran underneath language, that communicated in the space before words. That connection is what I want to tell you about, not the estrangement. What happened before the estrangement. What we both saw. In the summer we were 16, in 1982, in the Wind River Range. And how we have spent 30 years not talking about it. And what happened when we finally did. We were 16 that summer. Our father had a base camp at about 9,000 feet, on the east side of the range, in a basin below Fremont Peak. He had been running summer camps out of that basin for 15 years, and we had been going with him since we were old enough to be useful. That summer, we were old enough to be useful in a specific way. He trusted us to run short day hikes with small groups, while he worked with larger parties on longer routes. We knew the basin. We had grown up in it. He trusted us, and we were proud of that trust, and we took it seriously. On a Tuesday in July, we had taken a group of 6 teenagers on a day hike to a lake above the basin. The hike was 4 miles each way, well marked, nothing technical. We had done it a dozen times. The group was fine. The weather was fine. The lake was exactly where it always was, cold and clear at 11,000 feet, with the granite above it reflecting in the surface. We started back on the early afternoon, and about 2 miles from camp, on a wide stretch of trail that crossed an open talus field. Something happened that we have not spoken of directly in 40 years. Not to each other, not to anyone, until last spring. I need to tell you what we saw, and I need to tell you that I'm going to tell it twice. Once from my memory. Once from Vera's, because we have kept these memories separately for 40 years. We have not compared them. We have not let them influence each other. And when we finally talked, last spring, in April, sitting at her kitchen table in Laramie, we compared them for the first time. They are not identical, but they are close enough that I am still not sleeping well. This is what I remember. We were crossing the talus field. The group was strung out along the trail, the way groups always string out on the return trip when they are tired and thinking about dinner. Vera was at the front. I was at the back, from the boulder field to the north of the trail, above the talus. There was a sound, not a rockfall, not an animal I recognized. A sound, low and long, that seemed to come from more than one location, as if the boulders themselves were making it. I stopped. The group stopped. Vera turned and looked at me from the front of the line, and then, from behind the largest boulder, maybe 60 feet off the trail, something stood up. Very large, very dark, fully upright, looking at the group. Not at me specifically, at the group. The way you look at a collection of things when you are trying to understand what the collection is. I remember thinking, Don't move. I did not say it. I did not need to say it. The group had frozen, in the way that people freeze when something very large and very unexpected appears 60 feet away. It stood there for, I think, about 90 seconds. And then it looked at me, directly at me, at the back of the group. And then it looked at Vera, at the front. And then it turned and went back behind the boulder and was gone. We got the group moving. We got them back to camp. We told them it was probably a bear that had reared up to see over the boulder. They seemed to accept this. We did not speak of it to each other that evening. We did not speak of it that summer. We have not spoken of it until last April. 40 years. This is what Vera remembers. She was at the front of the group when she heard the sound. She describes it as coming from above and to the right, from the boulder field. She turned, which is when she saw me, at the back. She remembers the sound continuing for a moment after she turned, and then stopping. She remembers it standing up. She says it was very large and covered in dark brown hair, not black. She is specific about the color. She says reddish dark brown, the color of old wood. She says it was looking at the group, and that its expression, she uses the word expression, and then pauses, and says she knows how that sounds. But she uses it anyway. Its expression wasn't aggressive. It was, she says, evaluating. She says it looked at her, at the front, and then looked past the group to the back, to me. And she says, Iris, I think it was looking at us specifically. Not the group. Us. I think it had seen two people who looked alike at the front and the back of a group of people, and it was trying to understand that. I sat with that for a moment. I said, You think it was curious about us being twins? She said, I think it was curious about two people who looked the same being at opposite ends of something. I said, That is a very specific observation for something to make. She said, Yes. We sat at her kitchen table, and then she said, Iris, why do you think we never talked about this? I said, I don't know. She said, I think we didn't talk about it because we knew, without saying so, that talking about it would make it real. And making it real would mean we had to decide what it meant. I said, and we weren't ready. She said, and we weren't ready. I said, Are we ready now? She looked at me. She's my twin. She has my face, altered by different years, different weather, different choices. She looked at me with my own eyes. She said, I think we have to be. We talked for 6 hours that day, not only about what we saw, about the 40 years between then and now, about what it means to carry something with the person closest to you in the world and not be able to put it down, because putting it down requires putting it down together. And you have to be in the same room for that. We have not been in the same room enough. That is the estrangement, in its simplest form. Not a fight, not a betrayal. Just two people who carried the same thing in silence, and let the silence grow, until the silence was bigger than the thing. She said, Toward the end of the day, I have thought about it almost every year. Not obsessively, but every summer, when the light gets long and the altitude is high, and I am somewhere that feels like that basin, I think about it. I said, Me too. She said, What do you think it was doing there? I said, I think it was in its territory. I think we walked through its territory with a group of loud teenagers, and it came out to look. She said, And it saw us. I said, And it saw us. She said, Two of the same person at opposite ends. I said, Yes. She was quiet for a moment. She said, I wonder if it had seen twins before. I said, "It has been in those mountains for a very long time." She said, "Yes." I said, "It probably has." She said, "I hope we were interesting." And we both laughed, for the first time in a long time, sitting at her kitchen table in Laramie. We laughed. We had been talking regularly since April, not about what we saw, specifically, about everything else, about our lives and our children and our father, who died in 2014, and who we both miss in the particular way that you miss a person who made you capable of doing something difficult. He made us capable of being in high country, of reading weather, of staying calm when something unexpected happened. He did not prepare us for each other's silence. That was something we had to find our own way out of. We found it, I think, because of what we saw, because we had a thing we had been carrying separately for 40 years that could only be put down together, and putting it down together required being together, and being together required saying, "I am sorry for the silence," and meaning it, and starting again. I am 57 years old. I have a twin sister named Vera. In the summer of 1982, in the Wind River Range of Wyoming, at 11,000 feet, on a talus field below Fremont Peak, we saw something that looked at us with what I can only call curiosity. Two of the same person, at opposite ends of a line of people, on a trail in high country. I think it was curious. I think curiosity, in something that has been in those mountains long enough, looks different from the way we think it looks. Not quick, not excitable, patient, the way everything ancient is patient, standing behind a boulder for a moment, and then deciding to look, and looking at the two things at the ends that were the same, trying to understand, the way we were trying to understand for 40 years. And finally, in April, in a kitchen in Laramie, sitting across from the person who shares my face, finally did. There are things in the Wind River Range that have been there since before anyone had a name for them. They have seen most things. I hope they found us interesting. I think, probably, they did. We are interesting people. We just needed 40 years, and a kitchen table, and the willingness to finally say the thing out loud. She is my sister. I'm glad she is my sister. I should have said that sooner. I'm saying it now.